Everybody, I know it's getting late in the day and you probably have growling stomachs, but I want to thank Sam for that introduction and Dr. John Kilner for inviting me here. It's a privilege and an honor to share this platform with so many distinguished speakers, and I have learned a lot since I've been able to be here myself through most of these sessions. It's also an honor and a privilege to share fellowship with other concerned followers of Jesus Christ who are trying to uphold God's truth where they have been planted and to be salt and light in this world. I'd like to take you back in time a little bit, back to June of 1980, to an event that occurred that you probably never even heard of. And this was a Supreme Court decision, the United States Supreme Court, in Diamond versus Chakrabarty, ruled for the first time that a living microorganism was patentable subject matter. It wasn't just that holding that was significant, but it was also what the Supreme Court said. It was a 5-4 decision. And the Supreme Court said Congress intended that statutory subject matter, that is patentable subject matter, would include anything under the sun made by man. Anything under the sun made by man. That's the Supreme Court's pronouncement on what is patentable. What relevance does that have to us? I've heard people say genetic research is going to go on whether or not people get patents anyway. People were doing research before patents came along. People are going to do research anyway. Well, we need to be concerned with what is deemed to be patentable because the prospect of commercial interests and private interests motivated by profit obtaining patent rights can have a tremendous impact on the scope and direction of technological development in this area. Abraham Lincoln said that patents add fuel to the fire of genius. Incidentally, Abraham Lincoln was the only president of the United States to ever get a patent. It was on a barge that used to go down the Illinois River, but it was a patent. The founders of this country considered the prospect of patent rights to be so important that they made an explicit provision for that incentive in the United States Constitution. Article 1, Section 8 states that to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for a limited time to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries, that is a power granted to Congress expressly in the Constitution. And Congress has acted upon that. The first Patent Act was enacted shortly after the Constitution was ratified, and it has been updated periodically since then. Congress has enacted laws that give a patent owner exclusive rights to make, use, and sell the invention in the United States for the term of the patent. They used to be 17 years. Now, because we're trying to harmonize our laws with other countries under the GATT Treaty, it will be 20 years from the date of filing. Now, this is an exclusionary right. It doesn't give you a right to do anything affirmatively. It enables you to exclude others from using it. Now, that's going to be something important to remember as we look at what the Patent Office has done later on. Being able to secure these kinds of exclusive rights generates tremendous incentive. Indeed, some economic experts believe that the availability of patent protection is critical to fostering the development of commercially important inventions. In fact, the subsequent or the consequent economic power associated with patents has been a driving factor in the biotechnology industry, as well as other industries. There have been 5 million patents that have been issued in the United States since the Patent Office began. The biotechnology industry knew a good thing when it saw it. It also knew that it had need for long-term cash commitments, and it had a need to deal with protracted development cycles. So it needed the prospect of patent protection to attract that venture capital. For example, one U.S. company spent $900,000 over several years to develop a more durable and productive maize hybrid, and another $600,000 for a similar soybean variety. Genentech and Amgen and others who have engaged in recombinant DNA production of pharmaceuticals have spent tens of millions of dollars to come up with recombinant tissue plasminogen activator, recombinant erythropoietin, recombinant growth hormone, and factor VIII, and I could go on and on. They've spent tens of millions of dollars doing this. There is dramatic evidence of how this economic incentive has impacted the development of biotechnology and genetic engineering as a result of expanding patent rights available for those types of inventions. 4 months after the Supreme Court's decision in Chakrabarty in 1980, Genentech raised $36 million in a single day in its stock offering. $36 million. A 1984 National Academy of Sciences study estimated that a potential yearly business of between $40 billion and $100 billion lies in the biotechnology industry. If you don't think the prospect of patents can have an impact on the academy and researchers, take a look at these statistics. In 1988, the American biotech industry, this is just the American biotech industry, reported revenues of $762 million with export sales of $215 million. Those revenues were about double what they had been in 1987 and quadruple what they had been in 1986. By April of 1990, 10 years after Chakrabarty, over 7,800 patent applications were on file in the United States Patent Office dealing with genetically engineered life-related inventions. During the first quarter of 1991, U.S. biotech companies raised $1 billion through their public stock offerings. Clearly, patent protection has stimulated innovation, growth, competitiveness in the American biotechnology industry. If you look at Europe and the European patent laws, which have put a brake on this type of patent activity, their biotech industry lags way behind. And it's been recognized that it's that unavailability of patent protection that's had that big, profound impact. And there's been a tremendous push in the European community to try and revise their laws, bring them more into line with our laws so that they can give that impetus to their own industry. There is a danger, however, where so much money is at stake, where so much is involved, that pragmatic concerns regarding investment opportunities and in biotech firms and protecting American industry from encroachment by European industry and Japanese industry. In fact, some commentators have said that the Japanese think that biotechnology will be for them in a decade or two what the electronics industry has been for them in the last 20 years, that they will replace American leadership in that area. Those kinds of concerns may divert the attention of American policymakers, decision makers, people in the academy, people in the law, from exploring the moral implications, which we have been raising here today, of gene manipulation and other aspects of biotechnology. If our patent system may be providing a powerful encouragement, and I believe it is, and an incentive for developing technology that could be questionable on moral and ethical grounds, who will say so? Who will articulate what restraints or limitations should be imposed on the availability of patent rights for the fruit of research in these various areas of biotechnology? So far, Congress and the general public have essentially watched from the sidelines as these matters have been handled, dealt with, and responded to by the judicial system. A judicial system which will continue to impact this area unless other spheres of public opinion begin to have an impact. Over the last 16 years, since the Chakrabarty decision, we have seen the courts and the U.S. Patent Office continually take steps to expand the scope of patent protection to include just about anything under the sun made by man. Before the Supreme Court's decision, the United States Patent Office adhered to something called the Products of Nature Doctrine to deny patent applications if they dealt with living subject matter. There was a patent many years ago to Pasteur. That's about the only exception. Then Chakrabarty came along and changed all that. But before Chakrabarty came along, the Congress had enacted some special legislation, recognizing that the rights for plant breeders wouldn't qualify for protection because they were living things. The Congress legislated the Plant Patent Act of 1930 and the Plant Variety Protection Act of 1970, presumably leaving outside the scope of patent protection any inventions relating to animals, humans, microorganisms, other kinds of living material. Chakrabarty, as I said, changed all that. Then in April of 1987, which is 7 years after Chakrabarty, an inventor attempted to obtain a patent on a polyploid oyster. The Patent Office said, first of all, it would have been obvious, so it's not patentable. Secondly, it's a multicellular living organism. You can't get it. Even though it didn't occur in nature in its form, it had been manipulated by human beings. The Patent Office still took the position that Chakrabarty dealt with microorganisms, and that's all. This was a multicellular creature and couldn't be covered by the patent. The Board of Patent Appeals said, yeah, the invention would have been obvious. We agree with you. However, the other basis for rejecting this patent application we have to overturn, because the Supreme Court had recognized that a complex living organism beyond the microscopic world of bacteria could be subject to patent protection under that rubric of everything under the sun. 3 days later, the Patent Office of the United States issued a policy statement where they said that the Patent Office would henceforth consider non-naturally occurring, non-human, multicellular living organisms, including animals, would be patentable subject matter. Fiat. Patent Office just did it. Public comment? No public comment. Did they invite it? No. They just did it. Patent Office just did it. That policy is still there. Nothing's changed. A year later, the Patent Office issued United States Patent Number 4,736,866. You probably all know which one I'm talking about. Transgenic non-human mammal. The Harvard mouse patent. Genetically engineered mouse highly susceptible to cancer. That was the first actual granting of a patent on a multicellular living organism, and it was a living mammal. Animal rights activists got up in arms. Other concerned groups of citizens attempted to arouse public debate regarding biotech research, and they even sought legislation that would curtail this moratoria. The general public, however, was unmoved, and there was little negative reaction to the Harvard mouse patent. The legislature was paralyzed. Congress didn't do anything. So activists turned to the courts to seek relief. In the Animal Legal Defense Fund versus Quigg, they sued the Patent Office, saying that there wasn't any public comment, they couldn't adopt this policy without it. The court disagreed, said that it was appropriate for the Patent Office to do what it did, and the Federal Circuit, the United States Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit, went out of its way to say, even though, in addition, the Animal Defense Fund didn't have standing to assert this, so don't bring this into court and try and fight out a moral issue in the courtroom. We don't want to hear it. But anyway, for good measure, let's throw in the fact that a patent can be granted on living matter provided there is inventive manipulation and the subject matter is not found identically in nature. That's what the Federal Circuit said. On December 29, 1992, the Patent Office issued patents for 3 genetically engineered strains of mice. It seems clear from listening to what's been said here today that our society has not yet adequately considered or come to grips with the risks associated with manipulating the genetic makeup of complex animal life, especially human life. Nevertheless, our patent system continues to fuel the fire of biotech research. The pot of gold at the end of the rainbow is motivating a lot of people, especially in California. That's where Amgen and Genentech are. Under the influence of a judiciary that liberally considers anything under the sun that is made by man potentially patentable, Congress has remained content to accept the court's expansion of that definition. Under these circumstances, we need to be concerned about how far the courts may be willing to expand the scope of patentability for living subject matter. This is most especially true with regard to questions of patenting living human materials. At present, there are no real prohibitions or exclusions with respect to patenting living human materials. It may not yet be possible at present to manipulate human genetic material to produce enhanced human beings or to create some humanoid-like creature, an animal with human traits. However, the lack of that technology today is no reason that we should run away from those issues and those questions until we are faced with the arrival of the reality on our doorstep. It seems, from my reading of the law, that patent protection would be available for processes and products related to human gene therapy. Such research could produce a genetically altered human embryo. Could a particularly novel and useful human embryo be patented, cloned, sold? Doesn't occur naturally. Is the result of manipulation by human beings. The Federal Circuit, the Patent Office, the United States Supreme Court would say yes. Could patentable human gene therapy lead to patent protection for transgenic humans? It might. Certainly, that question, the patentability of those things, creates an incentive to alter or play with the human germline and to develop these technologies. The Patent Office tried to short-circuit this concern by limiting patents to non-human organisms. Put that in its policy statement. First, the policy statement is contrary to the Supreme Court. It wouldn't hold up. According to the PTO, the Patent Office, the justification for that limitation was the 13th Amendment of the United States Constitution, which prohibits slavery and involuntary servitude. If that is true, if the 13th Amendment is a blockage, then that language is superfluous in the policy. You don't need it. The fact is, though, that the patent right is a right to exclude others from doing something. It doesn't confer an affirmative right on you to do something. So the 13th Amendment isn't implicated in whether or not you can get a patent. Additionally, the Patent Office grants patents already for some human biologics, hybridomas, immortalized cell lines. Therefore, the Patent Office exclusion as to human organisms would not seem to extend to the cellular level or even the level of tissues. The Patent Office policy statement doesn't mention processes. An inventor could potentially control the market for transgenic humans or transgenic embryos by patenting the method of gene transfer, rather than by attempting to patent the product of the transfer itself. Claims drawn to the method of creating human organisms grant de facto rights to the organisms produced by those methods. Because genes themselves may be patentable, an individual might be able to patent both a given gene and the method of using it in gene therapy, creating yet another avenue for controlling the creation of transgenic humans or transgenic embryos without patenting the end product itself. Consistent with current patent law, a genetically altered human being would not be considered a human being. because a genetically altered mouse is considered distinct from a non-altered, naturally occurring mouse. Let's take a look at a hypothetical near human that was posited by one commentator. A genetically engineered near human being that lacked a brain, a source for harvesting organs for transplants, like the fetus we heard about whose pituitary gland was taken. Vehicles for medical research on human drugs and cures for disease. They can't feel pain, they don't have a brain. Eliminates the need for abusing animal subjects. An ideal surrogate womb. The central difficulty is obvious. We have no workable definition for the term human being, at least not in the patent context. Unless the term human being is defined, great discretion is left in the hands of the patent office, in the hands of researchers, and the courts, who will undoubtedly make that determination. Any creation short of a human being would appear to be patentable subject matter. The definition of the term human being that we can think of runs a couple of risks. It may be overly inclusive, including creatures we now consider to be higher animals. It might be under-inclusive, excluding sentient, altered creatures who morally and humanely may deserve to have legal protection to live normal lives. Can we start from the premise that a human being is a creature born to human parents? This requires a definition which establishes the parents as human beings, kind of circular. Can we say, well, we'll look at the benchmark of rational deliberation and choice to identify a human being? Many other animal behaviors suggest rational deliberation and reasoned choice. Orangutans have a limited mode of speaking. They're monogamous. If they choose one mate, is that a rational choice based on deliberation? A severely retarded person may not have the ability to make a rational choice, yet we have not questioned his or her right to live as a human being in our society with full legal rights. What about genetic makeup? Are we our genes? How much human genetic material must an animal possess to be considered human? Even if we were to develop an acceptable definition, we would still need to confront the issue of whether some limitations should be placed on the availability of patents for human-related biotech inventions. The patent laws should not contribute to the encouragement of research in areas where matters of morality and ethics would mandate imposing restraints. But we haven't explored that issue. The patent laws must and should serve the public interest, but they have to be informed by public opinion. Can we count on the judiciary to ride in on the white horse and save us? To consider the moral and ethical implications and perhaps generate limits for us with respect to the patenting of living human material? I don't think so. Consider Judge Richard Posner, who is the Chief Judge of the Seventh Circuit, United States Court of Appeals here in Chicago. On June 17th, 1996, a month ago, the National Law Journal ran an article on Judge Posner, an interview with him. In the article, it reports that, quote, he, Judge Posner, said he was comfortable with the idea that people are just monkeys with big brains. One step away from the Supreme Court. How would you expect Judge Posner to construe the Supreme Court's decision in Chakrabarty in the context of whether genetically engineered human life, monkeys just with big brains, whether that would be patentable subject matter? The issue is what is wise. That has been touched upon so much during this conference, and I reaffirm it. The issue is we need wisdom in deciding what should and should not be encouraged in the area of genetic research through the incentive, considerable incentive of the patent law. At what point does human manipulation and patenting of living organisms appropriate to humanity sovereignty over the created order that God has properly reserved for himself? Do human beings really have the moral standing and wisdom to meddle in the makeup of living creatures, especially humankind. Is human ingenuity really capable of controlling fully the forces it unleashes? Dr. Marshall Nierenberg, who won a Nobel Prize for his work in genetics, wrote, quote, "When man becomes capable of instructing his own cells, he must refrain from doing so until he has sufficient wisdom to use this knowledge for the benefit of mankind." The moral and ethical considerations should inform and control the application of the patent laws. Patents are by definition a utilitarian legal construct with an economic purpose. That which falls within the scope of patent protection cannot escape the inevitable effect of commodification. As a society, we need to resist the commodification of human living material? If so, then we may need to impose appropriate limits on the availability of patent rights for such subject matter. Presently, and in my view, the patent laws are adrift on a sea of pragmatism, where seemingly the only voice being heard is the one of economic necessity, driven by pecuniary motives and industrial protection and preservation. The real question, in my mind, is not whether the cost in moral and ethical terms of an invention's use warrants offering an incentive for its development, but rather whether the social cost of offering the incentive warrants offering the incentive in the first place. And I'd like to leave you with a word of Scripture from Proverbs 2, verses 1 through 6. "My son, if you will receive my sayings and treasure my commandments within you, make your ear attentive to wisdom. Incline your heart to understanding. For if you cry for discernment, lift your voice for understanding. If you seek her as silver and search for her as for hidden treasures, then you will discern the fear of the Lord and discover the knowledge of God. For the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding." And I think that's what we're all trying to search for here. Thank you for your kind attention.